Alright. Trying something new today. I know it's been a little while since I uploaded. Why? Because I'm fucking stinking busy. And that's a great thing. I mean, like, it's nice to actually be able to pay my bills now and, you know, be able to afford to eat and have some enjoyment out of life. So, yeah, thank you everybody. You're awesome. And I will keep continuing to try to make videos as frequently as I can. You guys want to know about all sorts of different things. I focus on hardware because that is one of the areas that I'm comfortable in. And I love hardware and I know it inside and out. But I also work in software. I also work in routing. I also work in RF. So, this video I'm going to do while driving because I don't have to fiddle with my camera. And, of course, it's more of a discussion, a talk. And as you know, I don't like dry, boring, stupid videos. So, let's try to make this entertaining, hey? Boga boga. Anywho, many of you guys are always asking about routing and switching, because, you know, you need to be independent, and you need to know how to operate your WISP, or ISP, or cable plant, or whatever. So, in a WISP, because you're working in a wireless environment, which is specifically dynamic. Whoa, there's a paradoxical term, right? But to explain, remember, with wireless networks, you're working in an environment that's constantly changing, whether it's due to competitors, due to physical interference, whether it's due to, I don't know, your own self-interference and poor RF planning. But that's rookie stuff anyway, which you get over once you start learning. But either way, your environment is extremely dynamic and constantly changing. That's why you'll hear me say often that wireless networks are a living, breathing entity. They are very much alive. They're constantly changing. For that reason, using the appropriate method of like traffic management is critical. And this is why you'll see many people cringe when bridged networking is mentioned. Yes, you can run a switch-centric network as a WISP using some more intelligent switching protocols and methods. I mean, now MSTI is available, as well as spanning tree and rapid spanning tree on many switches now, which does help. But yeah, my favorite flavor is OSPF with MPLS and Vpls. So, where do they fit? Let me explain the different topologies to you. So, bridge networks are fucking stupid. Why are they fucking stupid? And I say this aggressively because it's supposed to be funny. I'm making you a mark. Basically, think about it this way. If you've got a ton of switches across your network, number one, you're going to have a massive broadcast domain, okay? Number two, said broadcast domain can be very easily polluted if, you know, Ann Thompson down the road, who's 96 years old, is having problems with her internet and plugs her router in backwards with the LAN port plugged into your PoE. That's going to start dumping DHCP from her router, her DHCP server, into your network, which is going to cause mass confusion and cause awesome disconnects and all sorts of horrible things like that. That can be prevented through layer 2 isolation, of course, on a bridge network. So if you're running smart switches, layer 2 isolation is a solution. Adding client isolation on the access points, which is always a must anyway, also helps remedy this issue. You know, these are the ways that you isolate that so that they can't pollute the network. Now, digging a little bit deeper into that, when you look at client isolation on the access point is layer 2 isolation ultimately, because think about the access point like a switch, except the clients are connected wirelessly. So when you enable client isolation on the access point, it means that none of the neighboring devices, none of the clients on that access point can intercommunicate with each other. It blocks layer 2 communications, it blocks layer 3 communications. It makes sure that if somebody on that AP is polluting the network with DHCP, it's not going to puke it over to one of the other client devices and cause them to go offline. Now that's fine and dandy, but if that's plugged into a dumb switch, like some Netgear or D-Link that you've gotten off the shelf that has absolutely no ability for any kind of layer 2 or layer 3 management, well, what's going to happen? That client isolation's useless now. So, what's the point? But if you enable layer 2 isolation on said switch, and that's just port isolation, okay? Like on a Netonics or on a Ubiquity switch, you know, whatever, or even on like a proper carrier switch like a Adtran or a Juniper. What's going to happen is now it can't intercommunicate on that switch either. And if you're going all the way upstream to the front of your network to your router, then that's blocking it there. But this conundrum, this situation can occur again. So now at the next switch, you need to make sure that the same things are happening. Okay, so you have to have layer 2 isolation enabled straight across your network, and it can't not be enabled at any one point. Otherwise, at that point, you will have cross-contamination, which will defeat the entire purpose. It's like a house of cards. Okay, for that reason, we'd like to segment our networks. All right, so the next type of topology, moving from like simplest to more advanced, is static. Static routing, it's kind of Hail Mary. You know, it's just like, ah, shit. I know I can make this work if I say that these IP addresses are present at this gateway, so I'll just program this all in manually right across my network. Static routing has its place. I use it on tunnels all the time because tunnels like VPNs can sometimes be unstable. So if you're using static routing, it solves a lot of problems. You know, because with OSPF, if you just have OSPF going across the interface, you can have convergence issues and weird shit happen with tunnels. I mean, obviously, if the tunnel's stable and reliable, OSPF and MPLS work beautifully across tunnels. But I prefer to do static routing on the tunnel and then let the OSPF present at either side of the tunnel take care of passing the routes across that I determine fit to move across the network, okay? So, static routing, the way that works is you're basically at your border, and at each one of your edge routers, you're saying, that subnet's present at that IP. And you have to do that on both sides to make it work. That's basically how that happens. Okay, so that has a lot of flaws. It is an old way of doing it. I would discuss RIP, but the chances that any of you guys are going to be using RIP in your networks is slim to none. So let's jump straight up to OSPF. Open shortest path first. You don't really need to remember that, but it really kind of spells it out for you right there. With OSPF routing, the whole idea is that it sends the traffic down the path of least resistance. So what'll happen is that basically if you've got like a segmented network running OSPF, you've got point-to-point links. So the connections between each router are a dedicated subnet. I like to make them /30s. So it's 2 IPs from the one router to the next router, upstream to downstream, okay? Now, what that does, that breaks up the broadcast domain across the entire network. It basically eliminates it in one way. So what you end up with now is that all the routers are routing from interface to interface across the network. Now, I'll get to why that's not amazing in a minute. But anyway, so now that this is done with OSPF, you'll say, here's router 1, here's router 2, here's radio 1, here's radio 2. So you've got a /30 between the two routers, and that's the OSPF transit, basically. And then you've got a /30 between the router and its connected radio, so that radio gateways out through that connected router. The reason why we do it that way is because if your link goes down and you're at the site, you need to be able to access all the equipment at the site. If the radio's gateway is the router on the opposite side of the link and your link's down, it's going to be a little bit more of a pain in the ass to get into it, right? Remember that. Alright, so OSPF does a few things. Number one, it sends traffic down the shortest path, and it determines that by looking at latency from the from the source to the destination, basically. The next thing it does, it can also dynamically populate routes across your network. So what that does, basically, is that, this is typically the way I set it up, by the way, is that whatever routes are present on a router will be advertised across the network, so that every router knows that those subnets are present at that router. By doing that, it's making sure that, you know, if you add a router, you don't have to go to every single router on the network and put in static routes to say, hey, that subnet's accessible there. No, it does that. And one of the other things as well is you can also have your gateways. So your portals to the world, your gateway on your main border router, automatically populated, advertised across your network as well. So you don't have to enter that in everywhere. Here's a little tidbit for you. I like to make one default route on each router that's static. to the appropriate upstream. And I usually like to weight it at 120. MikroTik's default is 110, so I'll make it 120. So if OSPF convergence fails, it's going to fail over to that static route that's in place so that you can still access the router through layer 3. Although you can still do Winbox, but not every router has Winbox because that's a MikroTik thing. Sorry, Roman, which is specific to MikroTik. So anyway, there's that for OSPF. Now, getting to what I said earlier about all these interfaces that you have to traverse. The issue that arises with that is that if you do a trace route, which is a tool that looks at your jumps, your hops, your path from source to destination, you'll see, like, before you exit your network, if you've got like 26 towers in the way, you're going to see 26 hops before you get to the network. That adds latency because it's actually like being processed every time it hits a router. If you add MPLS to the mix, which is pretty straightforward, you now get frame forwarding. And what frame forwarding does, it takes it from source and just fucking shoots it straight like a bullet to destination, and vice versa. It jumps across that entire path. So instead of going hop, 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 hop from source to destination and back, it's now just shooting across. Yeah, I guess you could kind of call it a tunnel, but it's not. It's just frame forwarding. So that reduces latency big time because it does also add CPU overhead on your routers, but the trade-off's fine. You can go from like 26 milliseconds all the way down to 8 in some cases, right? Because it's forwarding it across the routers rather than routing. So, it's kind of cool. I can go into an MPLS session in more depth later on if you want. So now, we said, oh, segmenting the network's great. OSPF is great. If you're just running OSPF and MPLS, you'll have a subnet present at each one of your towers. So let's say tower 1 is 100.64.0.1, and then you make that into a /24 to cover your devices, your last mile devices there. Then you go 100.64.1.1 at the next tower, 2.1, 3.1. So now you got a bunch of subnets across your network. They can all intercommunicate with each other because OSPF says that's there and whatever, right? So that's that explanation. Now, there is a little benefit to bridged networking. And this is where we get that back, is that you can have central management for all your stuff. So in this case, number 1, PPPoE. A lot of guys like to use PPPoE because it's extremely easy to set up customers with their traffic shaping based on profiles. Okay, so you can have like a profile for bronze package, a gold package, silver package, platinum package, right? You can have those profiles and set up a PPPoE account for each customer that uses one of those profiles to determine that speed that they're going to be using. Okay? And the other thing as well about PPPoE that's kind of handy, not just the traffic shaping, but you can also hand out public IPs that way, which is handy as hell. Oh look, they're running fiber up the road here. Who's doing this? Spring Grove. Ah, that's Nexicom. So anyway, back to the point. You can add a really cool thing called Vpls now. What Vpls is it's basically a layer 3 tunnel. So it's kind of you can pretty much call it a VPN in a way. So when you're talking about tunnels on networks, layer 2 would be a VLAN, layer 3 would be VPLS or VPN, like using SSTP or EOIP or IP or any of those other things that are like tunnels, that are interfaces like a cable, an Ethernet cable flowing across the network. It's a layer 2 area that you can actually broadcast on. So let's bring that back. So again, the benefits to running VPLS on your network is you can have your like Perseem, you can have your VISP, Sonar, PowerCode, Azatel, blah 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 blah, all present at your border router, and it'll function within that bridge. So here's the way this works now. We go back to kind of a flat bridge network design where you've got one bridge at the front of your network, and that bridge essentially has all your tunnels terminating in it. And there you can also add layer 2 isolation, folks. So now you're getting the best of both worlds. You're having a dynamically routed network that will constantly change, have failover links, all that beautiful stuff that makes the network run itself, essentially. But now you're adding centralized control to it as well at the same time. It's a beautiful time to be alive. So when you do this, you can actually, like, for example, Perseem is the most common thing that I program for this sort of stuff. So you can actually have all your traffic coming to that bridge, exit the router out through a Perseem VMU, or whatever the hell you want to call it, come back into the router and go to its gateway IPs. Okay? This is just one method of doing things. There's a billion ways to do it. Other guys like to actually put it in line with the upstream switch, but then you're getting management traffic too. I don't like to do that because I like to keep the management traffic isolated to its own network. Alright, so that being said, with VPLS, you've got tunnels. So you've just implemented this gorgeous OSPF and MPLS distributed network across your entire network. Okay? So now, to be able to centralize everything, you need tunnels. So you create VPLS tunnels. So the VPLS tunnels utilize like the IP address and the ID of the tunnel, essentially. So that will actually create like an Ethernet type cable, I guess, scenario where your tunnel will terminate at the tower. It'll carry anything that's within that bridge at the tower back to whatever's at the other end of the VPLS tunnel. In this case, the bridge at your border. Okay? Now, once that's said, you're actually able to say, you know, this tower that's 26 hops away, all the client devices are getting their IP addresses from the border router at the fiber pop. They're all being throttled by the queues at the border router at the fiber pop. They're all being controlled by Sonar or Visp at the fiber pop. You know, they're running through Perseem at the fiber pop. You've now centralized everything. So you now still have all that beautiful layer 2 isolation at the bridge at each tower, at the AP at each tower, and at the bridge at your border. But now you're bringing home everything that's out in the network. So when we say last mile, by the way, we're referring to from the tower to the client. So from the access point to all the point to multi-point devices, okay? And that also refers to fiber distribution, cable plant, DSL. That's all basically the same thing. In fact, cable's the closest thing to wireless infrastructure as you might get because, yeah, it's physical infrastructure, but at the same time, it's still RF-based. So anyway, you now have all your tunnels bringing it back to the front of the network. You've only got to have your DHCP server at the front of the network, and you can also reduce the amount of IP space you're using, essentially, by using a larger subnet. So instead of having little tiny broken up subnets all over your network on different towers, you now just have one massive subnet for your clients' routers at your border, and then you also have a separate VLAN for your management devices. All right? Now, you might say, oh, well, shit, that's creating a massive broadcast domain. Nah, not really. Not really. Why? Because we've destroyed the broadcast domain. By adding the layer 2 isolation from front to back on the network, the client's router can now only communicate with one thing, and one thing only: the upstream endpoint, like the termination point, the border. So the border can talk to the client's router, and the client's router can talk to the border, but the client's router can't talk to anything else anywhere else because it's all isolated. Your layer 2 and layer 3 are completely gone, basically. It's just nothing can communicate between each other, which means that now you have a very teeny tiny broadcast domain between the border router and the actual last mile device, the client router. Okay? So that solves that problem. Pretty cool, eh? Now, any changes you need to make can all be done at your border, rather than, you know, done at every single tower or done at every single CPE. And in fact, this brings me to a little point that I should make about traffic shaping. With a lot of last mile equipment, whether it's Ciclu, Cambium, Ubiquity, TP-Link, Canopy, if you're really old and long in the tooth, you can actually set up traffic shaping at the device. I'm not so sure about Canopy, though, because honestly, I haven't touched Canopy. It's fucking garbage. But the whole idea here is that you can actually go into the device and you can do traffic shaping on it to set up your throughput. So you can say, okay, well, Mary Thompson down the road here, she's only on the 10 meg package. She's on 10 by 2 right now. Cool. You go into the CPE and you can change that. Why is that a bad idea? Because then you have to change the throughput on every single router, CPE. And if your network gets to the point where you've got 500 to 1,000 plus devices on it, if you ever change packages, like say, well, my gold package, wow, we can now deliver the gold package. We can do 25 megs instead of 10, or 100 megs instead of 25. You have to go to every single device on your network and change the traffic shaping on that. That's bad. In fact, if you're using Ubiquiti, you can just do all that in UCRM. UCRM has the ability to control the throughput on your devices through HTTPS. It actually talks to them, and it can actually set the traffic shaping for you in it. Whether you're using Hotspot, which is pretty much the way that anything that interacts with MikroTik works, or just general queues, or DHCP leases, or PPPoE, they all have the same thing in common, and that's the queues. So in a MikroTik device, which is why I strongly advocate MikroTik for small ISPs, you can create a queue entry for each one of those customers. One of the easiest way is that you find the customer's router and you make a static lease under the DHCP server leases, and then in there you can actually put the upload and the download setting into the device. It's one way to do it, okay? And then if you do have to change everything, you can change it at the front. But that's still a very inefficient way to do it. So now if you add your billing system to the mix, like Visp or Sonar or PowerCode or Azatel or MITS, any of that stuff, right? When you add that in, the billing system works the same way as profiles under PPPoE, whereas the customer's account has a package or a profile assigned to it. So I want this person to use gold. I want this person to use silver. I want this person to be on bronze. You literally just go clickety-click, and then it'll generate a queue entry inside of your router for that customer's router IP, throttling it there, so that you don't have to go across your entire network and make changes. Pretty cool, eh? And you have free software that can do that with UCRM, UNMS, and it has the plugins for MikroTik too. Okay? So that's pretty much my rant right now. Yeah, I'm trying not to drive around and discuss all this shit for you guys, but whatever. So I think that pretty much sums up different types of topology and routing practices on networks. And that's pretty much what you want to remember. As a WISP, you should actually have a network that can manage itself, manage its own traffic for the most part, because the environment is constantly changing. One link might be good one day, and it might be bad the next. So when you're running dynamic routing like OSPF, you know, that'll say, well, this link's, you know, borked, it just went down. No problem, I can take it down this route, down a different path in the network. You can also do really fancy stuff like scripting. There's tons of guys out there that are very experienced scripters for routers, whether it's Cisco, MikroTik, Juniper, but like I said, I focus on MikroTik. So you can actually set it so that it'll do a bandwidth test from time to time on each link, and if it misses a certain point, like if it's less than 100 megs across a link, it'll send the traffic down another link. It'll just turn that off, and it'll keep polling it until you've got the throughput back up, and then it'll send it back down another link. You need that in your network. You need OSPF, basically. So whatever your topology is, if you're a WISP, I strongly recommend running a routed network with, at the very least, OSPF with MPLS. And if you're going to do something a little bit wilder, something that's a little bit simpler, but at the same time just as intelligent as a routed network, look into some higher-end switches. With a lot of the switching protocols that are out there, routing isn't entirely necessary in that aspect. I still like routing because it really drills down and gives you so much control over your traffic. But a switched network is a little bit simpler to run in a sense, and at the same time there's less CPU overhead, because you know the switch fabric in these devices can handle like a huge amount of traffic, as opposed to a router which is limited by the CPU and how many packets per second it can transmit, or yeah, how much bandwidth, how much throughput it can handle, right? So there you go, folks. If you're running a WISP, go routed. I need a drink and a cigar. Anyway, that's my spiel for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'm going to try to get back to making regular videos sometime soon, but like I said, I am friggin' swamped right now, which I need that. That's good for me. It means I could actually, like, you know, somehow get out of this ghetto at some point. But I will get to making videos again soon, okay? So thanks, everybody. I hope that was insightful and helpful and not too over the top, or I hope that I wasn't too crazy in this one. So enjoy, and like, subscribe below, leave your comments and suggestions, and you have a good day. We'll catch you later, folks. Goodbye.